Denver District Attorney Beth McCann and her guests are here today to discuss juvenile justice, its unique features, what happens when juveniles are accused of a crime. DA McCann will share her ongoing vision and plans for criminal justice on this edition of Dialogue Denver DA.
The Denver District Attorney is a state of Colorado office elected by Denver voters. The two primary goals of the Denver District Attorney are prosecuting criminals to the fullest extent possible.
Your Honor, I'd like to approach the bench.
Both parties approach the bench, please.
And protecting the rights and interests of innocent victims.
The numbers don't add up.
I don't have any records that account anymore, except
Let me refer you to someone who can help. I've got him on the line.
Thank you.
You can't keep up with me.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Case closed.
Hello everyone, I'm Tamara Banks. Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. Beth, it's great to see you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you have some pretty amazing guests here
do.
today. Tell us who they are.
I will. So one of the things that I'm very interested in is looking at juvenile justice and trying to do a better job, or at least improve what we're doing with our young people that get involved in the criminal justice system. So right next to me is Benita Martin, who runs our juvenile diversion program, which I think is really a cutting edge, excellent program. And she's been working with me to look at ways to expand that program and reach more young people. So, and next to her is Courtney Johnston, who is a chief deputy in the DA's office. And I have appointed her to head up our new juvenile unit, which will be a standalone unit that will have folks in it that are really committed to looking at juveniles and kids in our system and how do we help keep them from going further into the criminal justice system. So
Great. Well, Benita and Courtney, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you both.
Good to be here.
So, Beth, talk a little bit more about what that juvenile justice system, that unit, looks like and what it means and why we need it.
So traditionally in the DA's offices, this is not just Denver, but in other DA's offices as well, juvenile court has been kind of a stepping stone, if you will, for deputies. So they start in county court, where they handle misdemeanors. They move to juvenile court, which has felony cases, but the penalties aren't as severe. And so it's kind of a training ground. And then they move into our felony courts. So often the DAs have kind of looked at it as, you know, oh, I gotta make it through juvenile. You know, it's not a place they really want to spend a lot of time. So I've always felt that juvenile court is probably our most important court system because we actually have a chance to make a difference. I think more so than by the time they get into adult felony court. So I'm very excited about being able to have really committed folks in my office who are helping look at that juvenile justice system and how to make it work better.
Well, you're right. That's where you want to get kids who are having problems is when they're young versus
Exactly.
waiting until they're older and those habits are formed in those environments that they stay in. Mm-hmm. So, Courtney, let me ask you, obviously juvenile court involves juveniles, but tell us a little bit more about what juvenile court is.
Juvenile court serves youth that are accused of crimes and are between the ages of 10 and 17. So Colorado law is that any child over the age of 10 or over, can be charged with a crime. Children under age 10 are not handled in this court for delinquency proceedings, and then all the way up to children that are 18 or 17. So it serves that entire population, and really the reason why it stands alone is because there's a recognition there that children are different. They're in a different stage in their development. Their brain development is different, and they sometimes don't fully realize the consequences of their actions and shouldn't be held to the same standard that adults do typically for the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, some people don't understand why you have a juvenile court versus just for adults. But that's a big difference, just understanding what you've done.
Right. It's important to recognize too that sometimes where they are in their own family system has a huge impact on their successes and on whether or not they can be successful at home versus in a placement. That's the type of decisions that, those are the type of decisions that we make is really in collaboration with the juvenile bench, with Defense Bar, with Guardians Ad Litem, with Department of Human Services, probation, diversion. We all work together to really find solutions for kids. It's a lot more collaborative than the adult world, and it should be.
So before we get to diversion, I want to ask you one more question about what kinds of cases do you see in juvenile court?
We have everything. So juveniles commit every crime from tagging, graffiti cases, all the way up to murder. So we make decisions based on those cases. We've got sex assaults, robberies, burglaries, homicides, some of those, but certainly plenty of lower level offenses, thefts and graffiti, car thefts, and trespass type of cases.
So Benita, we've been talking about diversion. Not everyone knows what that is. How would you describe diversion?
So diversion is an alternative intervention strategy that redirects youth from the criminal justice system. Essentially, they don't have to participate in several court hearings, and the collateral consequences are limited for youth that are a part of the diversion program. But at the same time, we want to hold them accountable for their crime with limited involvement in the formal court proceedings.
So I imagine not every juvenile is eligible for
No,
diversion.
no. Some of the eligibility criteria for diversion are it has to be their first time state level offense. And so we take all misdemeanor offenses and then some felony offenses as well. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is that they have to admit their involvement in the crime. And so if they don't admit their involvement in the crime, they're not eligible because we feel they won't be inclined to participate in the program. And so we want to make sure that we get full participation from them if they're going to participate in diversion. The third criteria is that during the intake process, our diversion officers have the client and their parent fill out an accountability contract, and that essentially outlines the rules and the regulations of the program and some of the services and programs that they have to participate in and adhere to. And so if they agree to that, they sign that accountability contract, which kind of bounds them to the terms and conditions of diversion while they're a part of the program.
So they're just not shuffled along to a program. They actually have to really be engaged in it.
Absolutely,
It sounds like.
absolutely, absolutely. They have to have full engagement in whatever programs and services that we deem that are necessary.
And what are some of those programs and services?
So we base the programs and services on the individual needs of the clients. For the clients that are having a tough time making decisions and they need to be steered in a different direction in terms of that, we have some cognitive groups that are held in-house, and who are diversion officers, they teach those cognitive groups. Oftentimes we'll have clients in the program who need mental health treatment services or substance use. One of the requirements for them to successfully terminate from diversion is that they have to be free of substances. And so for those who have a hard time remaining drug-free while they're in the program, we have a plethora of treatment providers that we refer out to and to do a phenomenal job with the kids. One of the staples of our program is the restorative justice programs, whose long-standing art program is acquiring restitution through talent. What we do with that is we hire local artists to come in. They teach the kids various art forms. They create and make and sell the artwork. All the proceeds of that artwork go directly to the victims of their crime. So that's one of the restorative justice programs that we have. The second one is the work program. We realize that 13 and 14-year-olds have a difficult time paying their restitution, or the families may not be financially able to pay. And so through the Division of Criminal Justice, we have earmarked a certain amount of dollars that go directly to the victims of crime. But the clients in our program, they have to work it off. And so we partner with a lot of local nonprofit organizations. Those nonprofit organizations allow the kids to work a 6-hour shift. And we typically do it during the summer, winter break, and spring break, and then some weekends. But they earn $60 a stipend. That again goes directly to the victim of their crime.
Wow, that's great. It goes back to your intentional focus on juvenile courts, juveniles in general, so that they're not continuing on this path. And now they've not only paid back the victims, they've probably learned a new skill.
We hope so, yeah. Absolutely. That's the goal. And as Benita said, part of it is this idea that they take responsibility, that they understand the impact that the crime has had on the victim or on the community. So, I think a lot of times, as Courtney mentioned, young people don't really fully understand the impact. Even it might seem a minor crime, like keying a car. But anyone who's ever had a car keyed knows that especially if they do the whole side, you're talking thousands of dollars of damage. Or if they incapacitate a car, that family is left without transportation. I mean, and we know kids like to steal cars, so some kids. So, the whole joyriding thing. But if you take someone's method of transportation, they might miss doctor appointments. I mean, kids just don't think that way necessarily. So I think the whole restorative justice concept is to help them understand that there is a consequence and help them appreciate the harm they actually did to the victim, so that there can be some level of empathy as well. So, and we're applying for grants to look at expanding even our restorative justice program, which I'm excited about, because I think Denver Public Schools uses restorative justice now, and they have seen a reduction in suspensions and expulsions. So we're hoping that we will be able to even expand the programs that we have.
That's great. Courtney, how many cases come through your juvenile court?
Well, in 2016, we filed 728 cases. And and we've got 5 deputies, so we divide that amongst all 5 of the deputies. And I would say about maybe 300 of those, 350 of those were victim offenses, essentially offenses that were violent in nature or sexual in nature. But many of them were low-level assaults, so they weren't all extremely serious. But a fair amount of cases involving a crime against another person.
On that note, talk about the circumstances it takes for a juvenile to be tried as an adult.
So that is an extremely rare circumstance, but it does happen. There's 2 avenues to have a child tried as an adult in district court. The first is direct file. So the direct file statute says that if a juvenile commits certain types of offenses, then our office is able to file. We have the discretion to file those cases in district court as an adult. Essentially, in a nutshell, these are kids that are 16 or over and have committed class 1 or 2 felonies. So those are murders, attempt murders, certain crimes of violence, so very serious sexual assaults. And then it's possible to direct file other crimes if that juvenile has prior felony adjudications. But like I said, it's rare. So our office filed 11 direct files last year. Those were all murders, attempt murders, some pattern aggravated robberies. Then the second avenue is a transfer hearing, and that is where the case starts in juvenile court and meets certain factors, but our office petitions the juvenile court to transfer it to transfer it to adult court. And no cases were transferred last year. So that's also very rare, and we try to be very judicious about using that process, only for the most violent offenders.
Yeah, thankfully you don't have to use that very often.
Right.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. We're talking with DA Beth McCann about her juvenile justice vision. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Dialogue Denver DA. DA. I'm Tamara Banks, and this is the portion of the program where we talk about a legal term. And today's legal term is direct file. And basically that means the process by which a youth is transferred from juvenile court to adult district court to be tried as an adult upon motion by the district attorney to the district court. So Beth, tell us a little bit more about that. We touched on that earlier in the conversation.
Sure. So I actually sponsored a bill in the House when I was in the State House that required a judicial hearing when, depending on the level of crime and the age of the young person, when the DA wants to file as an adult, against a juvenile as an adult. Now the process is that a judge will make that decision. So both sides have the opportunity to present their arguments. You know, the juvenile will have their lawyer talk about why they should stay in juvenile court, and then the DA would argue that this is a serious enough case, or the background of the youth is serious enough that it should be moved into adult court. The reason that's significant is that if they go into the adult system, then they can end up with a felony conviction, and they will go through the adult correctional system. If they stay in juvenile court, they don't have a felony conviction. It's actually called an adjudication, and the penalties are not as great, and they stay in the youth correction system. So it has a significant impact on a juvenile and his or her family if they are tried as an adult.
Yeah,
much more serious.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump over back to diversion for a quick moment. Bonita, tell me, how long does a young person stay once they're convicted, or once they're transferred into the diversion program? How long is the program?
So the typical program is around 9 months. The minimum amount of time that they can stay in diversion is 6 months. And those are for some of the lower level cases where the needs are not as great. Clients can be in the program for up to 2 years, and essentially the ones that are there for 2 years, they owe larger amounts of restitution. So it takes some time to pay that down. We take cases of clients that owe restitution up $4,000, and so obviously it takes them, it may take them a couple years to pay that off, because if they don't have the ability to pay themselves, we have to help them pay. But typically a contract is about 9 months to a year at the most.
Gotcha. So Courtney, let's say a juvenile goes through the court system and they are convicted. What happens next? Do they go to jail, or
There's
prison?
a whole range of options. So we really try, the goal of the Children's Code, which is Title 19 in the statute books, is to serve the best interest of the child. Our role is to look at what's in the best interest of the child, but we also have a second role, which is to ensure the safety of the community. That's our goal. So we're looking for a placement that's really the least restrictive placement for that youth. I mean, it's always our goal to leave the juvenile in the home if possible with services. And I would say that's the majority of cases, but sometimes that home is just not a safe place, or it's not a place that's going to really foster their development or their success in treatment. So we, in conjunction with the Department of Human Services, primarily they're the ones that look for placement, along with probation sometimes if Department of Human Services isn't involved. There's a collaborative effort to find an appropriate placement for that child. So again, we're looking for the least restrictive environment, and starting with looking at foster homes, group homes, but there's treatment facilities as well. Sometimes they need some psychiatric care, so there's certain facilities for that. We view detention, be it at the Gilliam Youth Center or Lookout Mountain, as a commitment. We view that as really a last resort, or reserved really for the most violent offenders that just can't be safe in the community. So certainly that happens, and we must use that sometimes, but that's not anybody's first option.
Mm-hmm. And you sort of touched on this issue that it's not typically just one problem. Like, they're not just, they committed a crime and now they're in
Right.
trouble. There might be psychological or safety factors in the home, and so I imagine there's a multi-pronged approach to
Absolutely.
really deal with a juvenile as a child.
There's an impulse, I think, when we deal with adult offenders to really look at the crime in a vacuum, and that's a whole number of factors why we do that. It's just there's not the resources or the time, the caseloads are so high. But with juvenile, we all try very much to look at that crime in context with the family situation, the mental health needs, the drug and alcohol needs, the safety needs, the developmental needs. We try to look at it really in context of all of those things and serve the whole child, a real holistic approach to making sure all of those needs are met, because we're all better off for it in the long run.
And so as you get older, as you turn 18 and so on, does your juvenile record stick with you for life, or?
No, not necessarily. There's some cases where it does, but there is a statute called the expungement statute, and that allows youth to expunge, get rid of that record altogether. And there's certain ways to do it, but if the case, if they successfully completed diversion, or if they successfully completed what's called a deferred adjudication, which is like you do all these things and then the case gets dismissed, then you can immediately expunge it. If you, I might get this wrong, but if you successfully complete probation, I think you wait a year, but you can, after a year, you can get that off your record. But even if you are committed to Division of Youth Corrections, and that's our more serious offenders, even in those cases, generally you can expunge, I think, after 3 years. There's certain crimes that cannot be expunged, sexually based offenses, certain violent crimes can't be expunged, but by and large, the vast majority of offenders, juveniles, can get their records expunged.
So for the most part, you do get a fresh start as an adult.
Yes. And even if you don't expunge, the juvenile records are available to see by only a very few agencies. So generally, employers, colleges can't view your juvenile record anyway, for the most part.
Yeah. So let's get back to diversion, and we touched on it just a bit. So if you finish your diversion program successfully, then what happens?
So if they complete their program successfully, then, as Courtney alluded to, they are eligible for immediate expungement. Now, about 5 years ago, our clients had to wait a year before they could expunge their record, and the problem with that was a year later they would either forget to expunge, or we couldn't get in touch with them to come down and expunge. So when the legislation passed, it was great because it allowed us the opportunity to, as soon as we successfully terminated them, we have a successful termination meeting with the clients and their families, and then we give them the expungement document at that date. Then they walk it across the street to the court, and about 6 weeks to 2 months later, their record is officially sealed.
And so if they don't do what they're supposed to do, and by the way, how many chances do they get? Is it just one time they make an error, then they're in trouble? Or they get
Oh, no. We give them plenty of opportunities because we realize that juveniles are going to make the mistakes, and they don't make sound decisions in a lot of situations, or they don't understand the consequences of their actions. So we give them a few opportunities to get it right. And so they could, make maybe 2 or 3 mistakes. It just depends. It's on an individual basis. The only way that they can be terminated before the program, their program ends, is if they pick up another state charge. So if they are charged with any second state offense, then we have to send them on. And so that's part of the unsuccessful process. If they pick up another charge, or if they're non-compliant with the terms and conditions of diversion, then unfortunately we have to refile the case, because the case was initially dismissed in court, but if they don't successfully terminate, then we refile it. It goes back to Courtney and her group, and then they make a determination on whether to take it to trial, or they move on to probation.
So how successful is diversion? Are there lots of good stories, or is it the exception to the rule that you have somebody?
There's many great stories, and we have kids that come back all the time, and and give us updates on how well they're doing in life. We do 1 year 1 year recidivism rates, and we did recidivism for 2015. So all of the clients that successfully terminated in 2015, we looked at the end of 2016. The success rate of those was 89%. So only 11% of those youth reoffended or recidivated into the system.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And Beth, you mentioned earlier grants. I mean, these programs don't just, money just doesn't fall out of trees to support these programs. Tell us a little bit more about how all these things are funded.
Sure. So the DA's office does fund part of the diversion programs and the staff, but we also apply for grants to allow us to contract with service providers and to expand if we can, provide funding, to pay service providers that we contract with to provide services. So we have looked at, I've been really excited about the opportunities with some of our grants since I've been in office, and Benita has been just tremendous at being positive about that, even though it means she has more work to do. But writing grants and helping us look at grants. So we're looking at expanding restorative justice, which I mentioned. We're also, we just got a grant to help us study expanding diversion so that it would include 18 to 26-year-olds. Because, kids don't turn 18 and miraculously become, responsible adults. And I think there is an opportunity there that we could hopefully develop a diversion program that would allow us to serve those youth as well, selected youth. Another thing that I'm interested in is doing some pre-charging diversion, which some of the other jurisdictions do. So in Denver right now, the kid has to be charged and then they can go into diversion. But as we've discussed, that can result in their having a record. So I am interested in looking at this opportunity to do some pre-booking diversion. So there are a number of things that we're looking at to kind of expand and change a little bit the way we do these programs.
And as a state lawmaker, before you were elected as the Denver District Attorney, you probably had a really interesting view of what was happening with juveniles in the criminal system. I imagine that's why you're much more intentional and focused in this first few months of years of your tenure as DA.
Yeah, certainly that experience has contributed. Also, when I was manager of safety, we had the Summer of Violence, and I started the Safe City program with Charlotte Stevens, and that program was really designed to help keep kids out of gangs and drugs and violence. So I've had this passion kind of for a number of years of trying to really look at the criminal justice system on a broader view, not just all about putting people in jail. There are certainly people who need to be put in jail, but also looking at other alternatives, people with mental health, substance abuse, young people. Are there better ways to address those issues than just the criminal justice system?
Right.
So,
well, great. This has been a great show. Ladies, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having
keep
us.
up doing the great work that you do with juveniles. Thank you to District Attorney Beth McCann, Chief Deputy Courtney Johnston, and Juvenile Diversion Program Director Benita Martin for today's informative discussion on juvenile justice. I'm Tamara Banks. We'll see you next time for Dialogue Denver DA.